Good evening, Little Masters, and welcome to episode 126 of the Prancing Pony Pod. You know, every once in a while, Sean, I am baffled by that number. The fact that we've had that many episodes staggers me sometimes.
Yeah, I totally get it. Every time I look at it, I think to myself,
100 and something?
Yeah.
What? Are you kidding me?
Do you remember when we first, I don't want to go too far afield with this, but do you remember when we first started out and we thought, should we add a couple of zeros to the beginning of episode
that was hilarious.
number one?
I thought it was a little...
That's optimistic, but yeah, why not? Let's do it.
I remember thinking, well, we could just name it episode 01. I mean, come on, really. We're never going to go that far. Yeah.
And here we are.
With all that aside, welcome to episode 126 of the Prancing Pony Podcast, where tonight we learn that Barliman Butterbur should never try to work for the post office.
Well, we've known that for over 3 years because he's been managing our mailbag for that time. But no, truthfully, no, he's a worthy man, but his memory is like a lumber room. Thing wanted, always buried.
Yep.
But folks, we'll head back to the common room in just a moment. But first, I'm Sean Marchese, the real-life Lord of the Mark, and I'm here with the man of the West, whose memory isn't honestly that much better than Barliman's, Alan Sisto.
True. Unfortunately, though, there are no wizards around to roast me.
Well, I don't think you deserve roasting yet.
Yeah.
But we'll table that discussion for later, because we've got a lot of show to get started here.
We do this time, yeah.
Yeah. Once again, folks, we're going to be starting with something a little different from our usual intro segments, and it's going to be a longer intro than usual.
Yeah.
But I think you'll find that it's worth it. I'll let time-traveling Alan from the past explain.
Well, today we're bringing you something very special. Now, a few weeks ago on Tolkien Reading Day 2019, in fact, Marquette University in Milwaukee, Wisconsin announced the J.R.R. Tolkien Fandom Oral History Collection, a new project to document an oral history of Tolkien fandom by collecting audio testimonials from Tolkien fans.
Now, chances are you've heard something about this somewhere before now, maybe in your social media spaces. If you have not, here's what's going on. Marquette University is looking for Tolkien fans to give audio interviews about Tolkien and what his work means to them. They've already started collecting responses, and they're looking for more. Their goal is 6,000 audio interviews.
That is a mighty goal. Now, these interviews are by appointment only, so we'll give you some information on how to get involved in a moment. But first, we've been fortunate enough to have the project's director, Marquette University archivist Bill Fliss, sit down with us for a few minutes and tell us a little bit about the project.
So with that, let me be the first to say, Bill Fliss, welcome to the Prancing Pony Podcast.
Well, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Well, we are thrilled to have you join us, so thanks again for your time. So you're an archivist at the Department of Special Collections and University Archives at the Rayner Memorial Libraries at Marquette University. A few of our listeners, and by a few I mean a very few, most of them probably know all about it, but a few may not be aware of the large J.R.R. Tolkien collection that you have there. So we'd like to start our conversation there. Your archive contains the original manuscripts and multiple working drafts for The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, as well as the manuscript for Farmer Giles of Ham, the original copy of Tolkien's children's book, Mr. Bliss, and a host of secondary sources and other published and unpublished materials related to Tolkien. Would you like to tell our listeners the story about how those manuscripts came to reside at Marquette University?
The manuscripts are at Marquette University because of the vision of a man named William Reedy, who was hired by Marquette in 1956 to be library director at a brand new library that Marquette was building. Reedy had a reputation as a manuscript hunter, as someone who could stock a academic library with books and resources. And he identified J.R.R. Tolkien as someone whose manuscripts he wanted to acquire if he could. Marquette is a Catholic Jesuit university. Reedy was trying to figure out what he should collect in his archives, and he decided that he would focus on Catholic authors. Okay. And so that's how he identified Tolkien as a Catholic author. He was clearly familiar with The Hobbit. He read The Lord of the Rings. He hired a friend of his in England, Bertram Rhoda, a bookseller in London, to serve as Marquette's agent. And Bertram Rhoda negotiated the sale of these manuscripts that you described to Marquette. Wow. And the connection was made in late 56, and the negotiations were through the spring of 1957. And so the manuscripts arrived over the course of 1957 and 1958. Reedy was really in the right place at the right time. He was the first person to ask, and thankfully, Professor Tolkien agreed to to sell the manuscripts. So they've been here for over 60 years now.
Wow.
And they've drawn researchers from all over the world. Christopher Tolkien, for example, used the manuscripts here for the work he did on volumes 6 through 9 and the first half of volume 12 of History of Middle Earth.
I think that's the first place I ever read about Marquette's involvement.
Yeah.
And we are also, they've attracted scholars from all over, but we're also kind of a pilgrimage site for Tolkien fans that pass through the area as well.
I bet.
That's great.
Well, were there any other material that I didn't get listed correctly? I want to make sure folks know what's there and available.
Well, we've added to the collection over the years. The manuscripts that we acquired in the 50s are really the heart of the collection. And then it expanded from there to document scholarship and fandom. For scholarship, we try to collect most everything that's published about Tolkien each year. And so we've acquired a massive secondary collection. We offer researchers one-stop shopping for a lot of their research. They can find a lot of out-of-print books or hard-to-find dissertations, those sorts of things in our collection.
That's fantastic.
And then over the years, there was it also shifted into collecting fandom. And I think that began because we began to collect and acquire a vast fanzine collection. There was a robust fanzine literature that developed around Tolkien starting in the early 1960s. And we've been very fortunate to acquire an enormous collection of that material. And so that's the historical fandom from back in the 60s, 70s, 80s. But we've also been looking for ways to document more recent fandom. And in recent years, we have harvested some websites and archived them to try to capture fan sites. But this oral history collection that I've started is really an attempt or a way to further document fandom today.
Well, Bill, anytime we have a guest on, we like to hear a little bit about their personal story about discovering Tolkien. So at the risk of asking you a question that you might have already answered for your own oral history project, how did you first encounter J.R.R. Tolkien's work? What history did you have with his work before you started working at the archives there? And how did you first get involved with the archives at Marquette?
Well, I have not yet recorded my own interview for the collection. I'm saving the 6,000th spot for my interview.
That makes sense. Yeah, I think you're allowed to do that.
I do plan to have the last spot, and if I live long enough to see the end of it.
Yes.
But I discovered Tolkien as a child from older brothers and sisters who were fans and were reading it in school. I think my first direct exposure was probably the Rankin Bass Hobbit animated film in the late 70s. And then I later, I think I may have read The Lord of the Rings before I read The Hobbit. But it was probably around 11 or so when I read The Lord of the Rings. And then Silmarillion I think I tried to read it when I was 12 and failed, as many people do the first time around.
That's a common story,
But,
yes, it is.
Yeah, but I came back to it, I think, at 14. I remember we were on a family vacation, and I was a long car ride, and I was reading it, and that's when it really clicked, and I was able to connect with it. And so I've been a fan since childhood. My connection here to Marquette, though, with the Tolkien collection is more indirect. I came to Marquette 15 years ago, but I was hired not to work with the Tolkien collection, but with a different collection. I was hired to process the papers of a former governor from the state of Wisconsin. But I stayed here at the archives, and then when the department head and at that time curator of the Tolkien collection, Matt Blessing, left Marquette to become the state archivist of Wisconsin, I ended up filling in in an interim role, and then that interim role became permanent.
Wow.
And that was about 6 years ago. So since then, I've had the opportunity to work with the collection. It's increasingly taken up more and more of my life here at Marquette.
I'm sure. I've no doubt about that. And now, of course, you've rolled out this massive project, the J.R.R. Tolkien Fandom Oral History Collection. Tell our listeners a little bit about what the project is, how it got started, and why now?
Well, the project is an attempt to document fandom through brief 3-minute oral histories collected from Tolkien fans. And my goal is 6,000 interviews. I chose that number because of its significance in The Lord of the Rings as the number of riders that Theoden musters and leads to Gondor to fulfill his oath and come to the aid of Gondor. So that's how I chose that as the goal, the number of interviews to collect. The idea actually began at an archives conference in the spring of 2017. I was sitting listening to a panel on podcasting. This was a group of archivists who were talking about their experiences attempting to begin using podcasting as a form of outreach to inform people about the collections that they have and to generate interest in those collections. And one of the things I've noticed about the Tolkien collection here is that we are a magnet for Tolkien fans who are passing through the area. And over the years, I've come into contact with so many Tolkien fans who visited Marquette, and I've chatted with many of them, and I really enjoy talking to them and hearing their story and their connection to Tolkien. And I was sitting in this panel, listening to this panel discussion, and I thought to myself, Bill, if you really want to document Tolkien fandom, you should start collecting the voices that you're encountering all the time.
Yeah.
And so that idea really led to me thinking about how I might go about collecting some of these testimonials. And so I wanted to keep it brief so I could collect a lot of them.
Sure.
And it would also kind of force people to be succinct and to zero in on really what's most important.
You must have talked to a lot of Tolkien fans. Actually, you don't have to talk to very many to figure out that they do need a little focus.
We are a verbose bunch. Yeah.
We can roll on.
So I started collecting the interviews in the summer of 2017. This was under the radar, just collecting them here and there. I was invited to be one of the keynote speakers at the MythCon, the annual meeting of the Mythopoeic Society.
Right. Yep.
In 2017, and that's while I was there, I actually began to collect these a little bit more of them.
Sure.
Okay.
That was like the first, I think, public exposure to the collection, and then after that point, I just kept collecting them from people I encountered, asking them if they'd want to participate. I do offer presentations of some original material periodically here at Marquette to public audiences. And so I would make a pitch to the groups, and some of the people would be interested in making arrangements to give their interview. So I gradually gathered interviews, probably about maybe 60 of them or so. And then I decided that I was really at a point where I should take this to a broader public. And so there was the idea of using Tolkien Reading Day as a launching point. And that's why the news article came out. There's a news article about the collection that came out. And then it's been talked about on social media. So that was in a way kind of the coming out party for the collection.
Yeah.
Since then it's attracted an enormous amount of interest.
Yes, that's great. And with good reason.
Yeah.
Well, what's the end result of the project going to look like? Once you get your 6,000 interviews, what are you planning to do with that? Is that just something that's going to be retained for the archive? Is it going to be packaged up for the public in any way? What are your plans there?
Yeah, I really struggled with the question of how to make this accessible, because I knew my goal was going to be 6,000 interviews, but I asked myself, at what point do I make these public, or how do I make these public? Do I wait until all 6,000 interviews are finished, or do I feed them periodically? And I actually got my answer, my inspiration from reading The Lord of the Rings again, reading the scene where Theoden is leading the Rohirrim to Minas Tirith, and they've arrived at the Ramos, which you'll recall is that outer defense wall. And it's been breached in places by the forces of Sauron. It presents kind of a problem from the Rohirrim, because it's like a bottleneck for them trying to ride onto the Pelennor. And Theoden, he gives his orders when they're there. He says, Eomer, you lead the first Eored, and it shall come behind the king's banner in the center. Yeah. And then he has the lieutenants Elfhelm and Grimbold are leading off to the other sides. And then he says, let the other companies follow these three that lead as they have chance.
Yes.
And so I thought, well, what I'll do is I will break the interviews into Eoreds of 120, and once the first Eored is done, I'll publish that on Marquette's library website in a digital collection, which will allow people to visit and listen to the audio interviews, read transcripts of them if they want, and then also be able to keyword search across the transcripts.
Wow, that's key.
Oh, how
right
cool.
there. That's brilliant. Transcribing is not going to be easy, but that absolutely will make a huge difference, I'm sure.
Yeah, and having them in 3-minute chunks actually is pretty quick to transcribe.
That's
it's
true.
It's not a terribly long amount of time to have to type out. But what I'll be doing then is every time a new AORED is complete, I get the next 120, then I will add it into the collection. So it's kind of an ongoing muster.
I love that.
Where the companies are forming, and then ultimately, once the 50th AORED is complete, is filled, then the collection will be complete at that point.
Yeah. Wow.
Such a great
Even
idea.
then,
I love that. That's
those small, I say small, I put air quotes around it, but those small AOREDs are still going to be 6 hours long. I love that.
Yeah, there's going to be a lot of wonderful material. I hope it's a site that people can drop in and listen to some of these.
Yeah.
But I also think it's something that they can, by being able to search across the transcripts, they can try to identify kindred spirits. So, for example, if someone really is taken with a character or a particular work, they can search across the transcripts and see who else mentions the children of Houghton, and then they can listen to those interviews to see what or hear what's been said about it.
That's great.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, I'm also building in another level to take it to the next level, and that's to offer the interviews also as data. Because one of the big trends in academic studies right now, academic libraries, is digital humanities, which is taking digital tools and applying them to traditional text sources. And so what I'll also be doing, in addition to publishing the audio interview and the transcript, is to provide access to the transcripts and the metadata in a data set that could be downloaded. And then that'll be added to over time, because I can see where scholars or digital humanists might be interested in getting at the raw data and coding it and analyzing it, because each interview is wonderful in its own way, and there's some really wonderful and powerful things that have been shared. But if you think of it as an aggregate body of data, you can look for and find trends, common themes. You can analyze what words people are using to talk about.
I'm already
Lord of the
picturing a
Rings.
word cloud and just imagining how fascinating that's going to be to map that data out. You're right. That's going to be great.
Yeah, I'm very excited at the possibilities for scholars.
Oh, that is going to be neat. Well, I know that we have a lot of listeners out there who would love to get in touch with you and be a part of this. How can Tolkien fans get involved? What's the best way for them to reach you, find out more, and schedule an interview?
Okay. If the fan is in the area such that they could visit Marquette, or they expect they'll be passing through Milwaukee, they could contact me directly at my email at Marquette to arrange a time to stop in for an on-site interview. To capture interviews remotely, what I decided to do was to use Zoom video conferencing and to set aside during my work week blocks of time when I would have slots available to receive interviews. And so I've set up through our website a scheduling page, and it's proven very popular. In fact, I had set aside 80 slots in the month of April within my work week to gather interviews, and I think all 80 slots were filled within probably about 10 hours. Just this past Wednesday, I made available some more slots for the month of May. And what I think I'll do moving forward is in the middle of each month, the 15th of each month, I will open up slots for the next month. So May 15th, I'll open up the June slots. June 15th, I'll open up the July slots.
Okay.
And it's possible. I mean, this project is scalable. I could increase the number of slots. In fact, I may do that if the demand remains high. I guess I would encourage your listeners to check out that page, and if it works in their schedule, to grab a slot. Otherwise, if it's not working out, either because all the slots have been taken or the days that I've made available, it just doesn't work for the schedule, I would counsel them to be patient and stick with me and look for a spot down the road.
Yeah. Because
even if I scale this dramatically up in terms of the number of interviews I'm collecting, it will still take some time for interviews to be collected.
Yeah.
And so there will be opportunities in coming months to do
Good.
the interview. Yeah, and the one last thing I would mention is that I will be attending different events where I may collect interviews. And so if people do plan to be at an event, they could check with me to see if I'll be there. And it might just be easier to meet up at the event and do the interview there.
Sure.
Okay.
For example, in August in Birmingham, the British Tolkien Society is doing Tolkien 2019. I'm planning to be there and collecting interviews as part of that weekend. So if any listeners are in the UK or are planning to travel there, they could just try to make arrangements to give the interview in person.
I think that's a great idea. And of course, we'll be there. We're going to be recording a live episode with some of the VIP guests.
Well, I look forward to meeting you face to face.
Yeah, that'll be great. We're looking forward to it. If we don't get our interviews in, we know that we can get them in then.
We can do it then, yeah. All right. Well, this has all just been fantastic to hear, Bill. Thank you so much for joining us. We wish you the best of luck with the oral history collection, and we hope to be able to contribute our own stories soon.
Thank you very much. I hope you do.
Absolutely. And listeners, if you'd like to find out more, please check out our website and social media channels. We'll be putting a link up to the webpage of the J.R.R. Tolkien Fandom Oral History Collection, where you can schedule a time to give an interview. Patiently, take your time if you can't find one right away. Hear excerpts of interviews already gathered, and find out more about the project and the collection. Once again, Bill Fliss, thank you for joining us here on the Prancing Pony Podcast.
Thanks for having me.
And listeners, we now return you to the podcast in progress.
And thank you, time-traveling Sean.
How are we doing on plutonium for the DeLorean anyway?
Well, not great, but Amazon's delivering the Mr. Fusion this week, so we'll be all right.
Oh, good. I'll save my banana peels.
Oh, good. Well, anyway, let's finally open that letter and hear from Gandalf for the first time since the middle of Chapter 3, as we conclude Chapter 10, Strider.
All right.
I'm going to go ahead and pick up exactly where we left off in the last episode, just as they're about to open it. Well, said Strider, when are you going to open that letter? Frodo looked carefully at the seal before he broke it. It seemed certainly to be Gandalf's. Inside, written in the wizard's strong but graceful script, was the following message. The Prancing Pony, Bree, Midyear's Day, Shire Year 1418. Dear Frodo, bad news has reached me here. I must go off at once. You had better leave Bag End soon and get out of the Shire, before the end of July at latest. I will return as soon as I can, and I will follow you if I find that you are gone. Leave a message for me here, if you pass through Bree. You can trust the landlord, Butterbur. You may meet a friend of mine on the road, a man, lean, dark, tall, by some called Strider. He knows our business and will help you. Make for Rivendell. There I hope we may meet again. If I do not come, Elrond will advise you. Yours in haste, Gandalf. P.S. Do not use it again. Not for any reason whatever. Do not travel by night. P.P.S. Make sure that it is the real Strider. There are many strange men on the roads. His true name is Aragorn. All that is gold does not glitter. Not all those who wander are lost. The old that is strong does not wither. Deep roots are not reached by the frost. From the ashes a fire shall be woken. A light from the shadows shall spring. Renewed shall be blade that was broken. The crownless again shall be king. P.P.P.S. I hope Butterbur sends this promptly. Worthy man, but his memory is like a lumber room. Thing wanted, always buried. If he forgets, I shall roast him. Farewell. Oh, man, that was fun. Haven't been able to do Gandalf in ages.
I know, and man, good job.
Well, thank you.
That was a big chunk of Gandalf dialogue.
That was.
You had some poetry in there.
That was a lot of fun. It's good to see Gandalf's character back, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, you really see him. You really see Gandalf come back here.
Yeah.
Especially in this last postscript.
Oh, I know.
If he forgets, I shall roast him.
I know.
It's just some classic Gandalf
Total
stuff.
Gandalf right there.
By the way, nobody can pile up postscripts like a wizard, right?
Oh, you're not kidding. PPP, well, or a Prancing Pony podcast.
Well, that's true.
As our patrons, some of whom are listening right now, would know, we have the Prancing Pony podcast Patreon postscript, or P5.
That's 5 Ps.
That's 5 Ps.
Gandalf manages 3 Ps.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But
yeah. Pretty significant, though, in just a single letter, I will admit.
Yeah. And I think this is where I first learned as a kid the proper way to do additional postscripts.
Oh, yeah. Instead of PS,
adding
S,
extra,
instead of adding S's, right.
Yeah.
When you're like 7, that's what you think you're supposed to do, yeah.
Because, when you're 7, you write a lot of long letters with multiple postscripts.
You do. You actually do, or I did.
You had lots of pen pals.
No, that's because I didn't have any real friends. No.
Now we're all sad.
Don't be. I was teasing. All right, so let's take a look at what's going on here. First, you get, of course, Strider's little encouragement. When are you going to open that letter? Let's get this done.
Mm-hmm.
It was sent at the end of June, right? Mid-year's day. So let's talk a little bit about the calendar.
So it is 3 months late. We gotta
Yes,
we gotta
it
make sure
is.
that we gotta get that out of the way right now.
Yeah.
3 months late. So, yeah, and when with that out of the way,
Right.
I guess it is as good a time as any to talk about how Tolkien worked out the Shire calendar, because we get this mid-year's day here, and we don't have a mid-year's day in our calendar, at least not one that's called that. So what's that about?
Right.
Well, have a look at Appendix D in Lord of the Rings, and we'll see what that is.
Right.
First of all, if you look at the calendar that's on the first page of that appendix, you'll see that all 12 months in the Shire Reckoning calendar have exactly 30 days each, right?
That's right. I mean, none of this 30 days, half September, April, June, and November, all the rest have 31, except for February. It's a different one. I mean, none of that remembers some sort of crazy
a
mnemonic
device like that. Yeah,
that's right. And it's better than that, too, because as Tolkien says in Appendix D, every year began on the first day of the week, which for the Shire calendar is Saturday.
Mm-hmm.
And so ended on the last day of the week, Friday. The mid-year's day, and in leap years, the overleaf, had no weekday name. They were just mid-year's day and the overleaf.
Right.
The leaf before mid-year's day was called one leaf, and the one after was called two leaf. And then you got the same thing with the Yule. At the end of the year was one Yule, and the beginning of the year was two Yule.
Right.
Now, how cool is that? I mean,
got to make things pretty simple.
It really does, because by setting it up this way, each date always fell on the same weekday. So this episode releases on May 26th, which happens to be a Sunday. In the Shire calendar, May 26th would always fall on a Friday, but it'll always fall on a Friday. You never had to think, oh, that was on a Tuesday last year. Yule was always a Friday and Saturday. Mid-year's day was an extra day that didn't even have a weekday name associated with it. Okay, that's a little confusing, but it was consistent.
And it would be confusing, I guess,
initially.
if you're trying to figure out what time the bank opens or something, but it's a holiday, so you're not going to really have to do anything.
That's
right?
true.
So,
yeah, mid-year's day,
Yeah, really cool stuff. And I love that appendix about the calendar. It's always been one of my favorites. That's also the same one where you get the cool stuff about the days of the week and the names of the days of the week in Elvish and in Hobbitish, and that's really cool stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so you talked about the Leaf before Mid-Year's Day and the one after Mid-Year's Day.
Right.
So just to be really clear, this Mid-Year's Day, which is also called Midsummer or Leaf in the prologue, was the midmost of 3 days right in the middle of the year, right? The 3 leaf days.
So after the 6th month, there was 1 leaf, Mid-Year's Day, 2 leaf, and then the 7th month began. Right.
Right. But there was also a leap day added every 4 years called the Overleaf, which was pretty special too. Tolkien says that was a day of special holiday, but it did not occur in any of the years important to the history of the Great Ring. It occurred in 1420, the year of the famous harvest and wonderful summer, and the merrymaking in that year is said to have been the greatest in memory or record.
I love that.
By the way, all of the names that Tolkien gives to the months in the Shire calendar, if you look at this in the appendix, there's things like foreleaf and afterleaf for the months before and after Mid-Year's Day.
Right.
You've got for Yule and after Yule. All of those month names, including my personal favorite, Winterfilth, which roughly corresponds to October.
Right.
All of those month names are actually based on the real Anglo-Saxon calendar. Which was recorded by... Yeah, isn't that cool? It's actually recorded by a medieval scholar named the Venerable Bede. In a work called... Yeah, really famous name.
Bede, of course,
Of course, yeah. He wrote a work called On the Reckoning of Time, De Temporum Ratione. And he's got all these calendars in there, and one of them is the Anglo-Saxon calendar. So that's where Tolkien got those very interesting names from.
Man, that's wonderful stuff. Not surprising. Though it's interesting that he gave those dates or those month names to the Shire and not to, let's say, Rohan. But when would he have had a chance to bring up the Rohirric calendar? So.
I bet if he had created the Rohirric calendar, he probably would have.
And then he would have had to rejigger the Shire calendar.
He might have made them. He might have made them more Old English because he did.
That's
as
true.
He usually did. He kind of changed the spellings and things like that. Yeah.
So going back to the date that this fell, which is really, after the end of June, but before the beginning of July, which is kind of hard to understand or wrap your head around.
Right. It's after June, before July. I know it is.
Right.
It's a hard concept for us to wrap our heads around.
I don't get that. So it was just after Gandalf left the Shire, but of course it was before his capture by Saruman. So interestingly, though, he tells them basically leave no later than a month from now.
Oops.
Thanks a lot, Barliman.
As long as we leave 2 months ago, we're fine.
Yeah, we should have left by July 30th, but, we left on September 23rd. That's okay.
Yep. Good old Barliman.
Yeah, good old Barliman. Good old Barliman. I thought it was a little odd that Gandalf, who is usually pretty sure of himself, says, if I do not come, Elrond will advise you.
Yeah. That's a sign that,
he knows something's up.
He knows things are,
There's some risk. And we'll get to more of that later.
Significant risk, yeah.
Yeah. Also, interesting that he doesn't mention the ring by name. He just says, do not use it again. And it is capitalized.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, because, he's leaving this letter with Barliman. He doesn't know who might get their hands on it.
Yeah, he doesn't want Barliman to know. Yeah.
Yep. Or anybody else. What if something happens to Barliman? What if the Black Riders get their hands on this letter?
What if Nob gets his hands on it? Anyways.
We don't want that.
No. Even in his slow pate, he might figure something out.
Right. And then right after the admonition not to use the ring again, or it again, he says, don't travel by night.
Yeah. Well, that kind of gives us a glance forward to the next chapter. Aragorn tells the hobbits that the Black Riders, quote, do not see the world of light as we do, but our shapes cast shadows in their minds, which only the noon sun destroys. And in the dark, they perceive many signs and forms that are hidden from us. Then they are most to be feared.
Right. And I'm also thinking of letter number 210. That's the letter on the infamous Zimmerman script treatment.
Oh, yes.
In which Tolkien said that the peril of the Black Riders is almost entirely due to the unreasoning fear which they inspire. They have no great physical power against the fearless, but what they have, and the fear that they inspire, is enormously increased in darkness. And that emphasis in darkness, that emphasis was Tolkien's. That's not me.
Oh, yeah.
That. He said that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. He italicized that.
Right.
It's the darkness that's important, and that's exactly why Gandalf's telling him don't travel by night. But he doesn't tell him don't travel by night because the Black Riders from Mordor might get you. He's just he doesn't need to. He doesn't want to.
He doesn't need to, and you don't want to put more information in this letter than you absolutely have to.
Loose lips sink ships, man.
Yeah.
And then, of course, we get the wonderful, wonderful poem.
I love this. Is there a Tolkien fan around who does not love this poem?
Is there a Tolkien fan around who doesn't know this poem practically verbatim?
Right.
It's so
Good
well
point.
known. I do like that he leads with the fact that his true name is Aragorn. And that's important. We're going to get to that in a little bit. But in the meantime, just a little bit of word nerdery about one of everybody's favorite phrases, all that is gold does not glitter. Now, this, of course, is a reversal of the well-known phrase, all that glitters is not gold. So what about that phrase? Well, you're going to often hear Shakespeare as the source of it, and it is perhaps the most well-known source. In 1596, The Merchant of Venice included the line, all that glisters is not gold, though you'll see it as glitters, not glisters, in modern renditions.
Right. And so, as you said, that is probably the best known source, but not surprisingly, this concept inherent in it of shiny things not always being valuable, that actually goes back much farther than that.
Yeah.
Geoffrey Chaucer in 1380, in one of his earlier poems, said that, and I'm going to do some Middle English here. I apologize in advance. He said that it is not all gold that glittereth.
Okay.
There's also a 12th century, even earlier than that, a 12th century French theologian, Alain de Lille, who wrote, and I'm not going to do this one in French, but the translation is, do not hold everything gold that shines like gold.
Oh, I like that one.
Hammond and Scull point out yet another Chaucer quote, and this comes from the Canon's Yeoman's Tale and Canterbury Tales.
Yeah.
More Middle English, I apologize.
Oh, good.
But all thing which that shineth as the gold, nis not gold, as that ye have heard told.
Oh, now that's wonderful. I love that. We need to include more Middle English just so I can hear that.
Thank you. I'll do it every time you make me.
Twist my arm, twist my arm. Don't throw me in the briar patch. So
exactly.
The meaning of the proverb, of course, is fairly clear. The attractive thing is not always as valuable as it may first appear to be. But that's what makes Tolkien's reversal of the proverb sheer brilliance. I mean, here the proverb means that the unattractive thing may, in fact, be highly valuable.
Right. He's turning it around. Yeah.
Exactly. The thing that does not glitter may, in fact, be gold. What a great verse as it's applied to Strider at this very moment.
Yeah. Perfectly applicable, because here is a guy that certainly does not glitter. He certainly doesn't look pretty. He doesn't look like much, but man, he is gold.
And he is old, right? The old that is strong does not wither. So we understand that he's, we already know that he's older than he looks. He said that.
Yeah.
Some of the rest of the stuff is addressing things that we'll get to later, right?
Yeah. The first 4 lines are sort of current state. They're describing him as he is now.
Yeah.
And then the second 4 lines are the
prophetic.
sort of the future, the prophecy. Yeah.
Absolutely.
We also need to point out there was also a counterpoint to All That Is Gold Does Not Glitter, presented by a Mr. Page and a Mr. Plant in 1971.
Oh, yes, there was.
Who wrote, there's a lady who's sure all that glitters is gold.
Yes.
And she's
buying a Stairway to Heaven. Yeah.
Right. So don't forget that.
The irony is I literally listened to that song this morning as I was taking my son to school.
That's awesome.
I mean, it just was up on my classic rock playlist, and there it was.
That is totally awesome.
I thought of that. I thought, well, there you go. I mean, I know Led Zeppelin were inspired by some of the Tolkien stuff. So,
to say the least.
To say the least, right? One of the more well-known bands to ever have been inspired. So,
right.
Yeah.
And I think, obviously, I was familiar with. Not obviously, but for me, I was familiar with Stairway to Heaven before I read Lord of the Rings. And when I first read this, I thought, whoa, it's just like Stairway to Heaven, man. And I'm sure I went and told several of my teenage friends how excited I was.
Did you like throw the horns and comb your mullet?
I did not have the mullet, but I probably did throw the horns.
There you go. All right. Well, before we get too sidetracked by that, I will say this, just in case Frodo wasn't sure that this was really Gandalf. I mean, I know he said, hey, it's Gandalf's script. Certainly seems to be his message. We've got his rune, which we'll talk about shortly. But certainly this last little note about Butterbur, clearly this is Gandalf. It's his tone. It's his
totally.
It's absolutely. It sounds like
if he forgets, I shall roast him. You could not mistake that for anybody else. That is totally
I don't know
Gandalf.
Who else would say that? Yeah, just Gandalf. But talk to us a little bit about that rune. What when you're looking at your book and you see that vertical line and the 2 diagonals and the little dots.
2 little diagonal lines coming. Yeah, you've seen it now. 4 times in this letter.
Yeah.
And if you're not sure what that is, check Appendix E, where you'll find out that it's the Carith, or the Elvish rune for G. So it's just Gandalf's initial.
Oh, that's
easy. All you got. Yeah.
And I thought you were going to be able to go on and on.
I could, but no, I'm not.
No, that's okay. We have a long episode. I mean, we're already.
Yeah, exactly.
We had a 20-minute intro segment, which is a little longer.
Right, exactly. I'm trying to keep it succinct.
Keep it pithy. All right.
Yeah.
So I've got you reading the next little bit about the reactions that we see. So, we've now gotten the letter. What does Frodo think, and how do each of them respond?
Okay. Frodo read the letter to himself, and then passed it to Pippin and Sam. Really, old Butterbur has made a mess of things, he said. He deserves roasting. If I had got this at once, we might all have been safe in Rivendell by now. But what can have happened to Gandalf? He writes as if he was going into great danger. He has been doing that for many years, said Strider. Frodo turned and looked at him thoughtfully, wondering about Gandalf's second postscript. Why didn't you tell me that you were Gandalf's friend at once? He asked. It would have saved time. Would it? Would any of you have believed me till now? Said Strider. I knew nothing of this letter. For all I knew, I had to persuade you to trust me without proofs, if I was to help you. In any case, I did not intend to tell you all about myself at once. I had to study you first, and make sure of you. The enemy has set traps for me before now. As soon as I had made up my mind, I was ready to tell you whatever you asked, but I must admit, he added with a queer laugh, that I hoped you would take to me for my own sake. A hunted man sometimes wearies of distrust and longs for friendship. But there, I believe my looks are against me.
I know how he feels. My looks are against me often.
That's why we do an audio podcast.
That's right. Faces for radio, folks.
Nobody can hold our looks against us.
There you go. I'm sorry. Holding things against me. The only thing I ever think of when somebody says that is,
would you hold it against me?
If I said you had a beautiful body, would you hold it against me? I am no longer infected.
I am no longer infected. Yep. I know. Every single time.
An episode is not an episode until some Python show or movie has been quoted at least once.
Exactly.
2 things to note before we get on to the discussion of this passage. First was that bit about Gandalf going into danger. Second, I thought this was really key because it's mentioned and it comes into relevance later. Frodo wonders about the second postscript. So let's look at that second postscript. It was make sure that it is the real Strider. There are many strange men on the roads. His true name is Aragorn. That's going to be important here in a little bit because keep in mind, Strider has not seen the letter. He now knows about it and he knows some of what's in it based on what Frodo has said, but he doesn't know that yet. And that's important.
Right. He doesn't know that his true name is mentioned in the letter, does he?
Yeah, he doesn't even know that the verse has been mentioned yet, but that will come in too. Right. So his reaction's great, right? He knows he's got this kind of twofold reaction. First, he had to try to persuade the hobbits without evidence because he didn't know that Gandalf had written this letter. But interestingly, something that I don't think anybody thought of until this moment when he mentions it, is that he had to make sure the hobbits weren't a trap.
And that's really important, that he needs to know that he can trust them as much as they need to know that they can trust him.
Knowing who he is.
They're testing each other.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's the hobbits can't even imagine that being relevant. And us as readers, if we're first-time readers, we don't even see that. But as readers who really understand who he is,
viewpoint.
Right, exactly. But as readers who know who Strider is, of course he has to make sure.
Right.
He would be foolish to speak openly to anybody that he hadn't fully vetted.
Yeah. It's one of those, this is one of those chapters that I think really is different on the first reading.
Isn't it?
Than on subsequent readings. You know, we talk every once in a while, I think, we've talked with like folks like Verlin Flieger and things like that about how you can only read them for the first time once. And how
so
different it is, because we do tend to read it over and over again, and it's you never recapture that first reading. And this is a chapter, isn't it, that it's just there's so much that you don't know about Strider. And subsequent readings really do change it, especially once you know everything that you know about who he is. And we read this now and we see he's the king, he's Aragorn, son of Arathorn. It's we know this guy, we love this guy, but first time you read this, think back to what you didn't know about this character and the peril that was potentially
you
there
really
for the
felt
hobbits.
that peril with the hobbits when well, especially in a moment we're going to get to in a little bit, but I also liked his genuine hurt really about not being accepted at face value. This comes back to something we talked about last week. How he just wishes that people would take him at his word, man.
I know. That's really cool. There's a nice little vulnerability there. This is book Aragorn, and he's very strong. He's very haughty. He doesn't have that uncertainty about himself that we sometimes see, like with movie Aragorn.
The lack of confidence,
Still, he's human, and it's like, man, I just want people to trust me sometimes.
On my own, for my own, on my own word and on my own merits. Right, exactly.
Yeah, and longs for friendship. I like that too.
Yeah. Of course he does. He's on the road all the time. Every place he is, he's a stranger. He's an outsider here in Bree. How does Barliman put it again? No accounting for East and West.
Right.
Meaning the Rangers and
the Shire folk. Yep.
That's tough being lumped in with those hobbits, man. I mean, that's and I'm sure that's how he's treated everywhere, right? As this outsider, as this.
I'd be willing to bet he's treated worse in a lot of places.
Oh, I'm sure, much worse.
For as poorly as he's treated in Bree. Bree is a pretty cosmopolitan place, and they get a lot of weird people from all over the place.
True,
but maybe other places he goes, you gotta wonder.
Yeah. So we're not going to read that, but boy, I do love Pippin's attempt to do what he always does, which is inject his trademark humor. The comedy makes about
disarm the situation with a bad joke.
About lying in hedges and ditches. But Strider's response totally misses the humor. If he wants a friend, this is not it. I need to teach him. This is not how you act when somebody's trying to be funny. You laugh.
You're not tough enough. Yeah,
that's right. He basically says you can't handle the truth. I mean, it's a pretty harsh response.
Isn't that cool? Because you talk about that, and I'm thinking back to one of my favorite moments from later on. I think it's from the Houses of Healing when Merry makes a joke, and Aragorn comes back with a joke, and and Merry says something to the effect of, that's just the way we hobbits are. We like to make jokes in situations like this, and Aragorn says, "I know, otherwise I wouldn't do the same thing."
Right.
So you really see that change in Aragorn. Here, he can't get on board with the Hobbit joke. He's not plugged into the Hobbit humor, or he's just been on the run for so long that he's just not good at relating to people right now.
Especially sarcastic humor like that, right? Yeah.
Right. But later on, he's totally different.
I remember that line. We'll have to look it up because, of course, I don't remember the exact circumstances, but I remember even mentioning it, I think, in one of my Book Week posts. So I know where I can find it.
I'm sure you do, yeah.
Of course, Sam is still suspicious. You never mentioned Gandalf to the letter. You might be a spy. A spy.
Right.
I mean, you could have killed the real Strider and taken his place.
And he really thinks he's figured it out. It's like, what have you to say to that?
That's right. What have you to say to that? I'm certain.
Check and mate, sir.
That's right. Check and mate. And I'm going to read Aragorn's response. It's just a short bit, but it is very potent. It's filled with a lot of interesting stuff that we're going to talk about. If I had killed the real Strider, I could kill you. And I should have killed you already without so much talk. If I was after the ring, I could have it now. He stood up and seemed suddenly to grow taller. In his eyes gleamed a light, keen and commanding. Throwing back his cloak, he laid his hand on the hilt of his sword that had hung concealed by his side. They did not dare to move. Sam sat wide-mouthed, staring at him dumbly. But I am the real Strider, fortunately, he said, looking down at them with his face softened by a sudden smile. I am Aragorn, son of Arathorn, and if by life or death I can save you, I will. What a moment.
And he's used that name that he doesn't know that Gandalf
That's exactly
put in
right.
the letter.
That's exactly right. That seals it.
Mm-hmm.
We'll see that when you pick up the next line, but that seals it for Frodo. He mentions the name Aragorn that Gandalf had included in the letter.
Right.
It was not mentioned out loud. Sam made the point. You'd never mentioned Gandalf until we read this letter from Gandalf. And I'm sure in his mind, Frodo's thinking there is that possibility. But then he mentions his real name.
Right.
And that shows...
And that's the proof.
It is, but it also shows, how we talked about how he has to find that he can trust the hobbits just as much as he has to get the hobbits to trust him. Here he is expressing that trust before he gets their trust.
Right. That's a good point. Yeah. He has made up his mind to trust them.
Yep.
He's revealing his true identity to them.
Which is hugely important. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. That's a good catch.
I think it's also interesting to note that obviously Bree, they allow open carry and concealed carry, apparently.
Apparently.
He had hung it concealed by his side, so.
Right. But then he shows it.
Yeah. So.
Yeah. So let's talk about why he decides to suddenly reveal the hilt of the sword that's there.
Yeah. Or why he decides to stand up and say, if I was after the ring, I could have it now. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well,
right. So the reason that he does this at this point, simply put, he has a moment of temptation to take the ring and it passes almost immediately. And Sean, I think you've got a quote from Paul Coker's Master of Middle-earth that touches on this.
Yeah. In our last episode, we quoted from that book, which, you mentioned is one that it's kind of overlooked a lot these days because it did come out before the Silmarillion. And so there's been a lot of scholarship that sort of
superseded
just a bit more updated. Yeah, that's a good word for it. Superseded. And it's just a little bit more up to date. But there's some really great stuff in that book. He's got a whole chapter on Aragorn.
Yeah.
And he talks quite a bit about this scene, and I'm going to read a little bit from that.
Okay.
Coker notes that Aragorn could easily take the ring from the hobbits by force or fraud, and use its magic to win his long-sought throne, and with it the maiden he loves, has not failed to cross his mind. Like every other leader of the West, he is given one fateful chance to yield to its temptation. But he conquers it, and is never bothered by it again.
That's right. And we'll talk more about that later. We have a great question in the mailbag that we'll really get to explore. So we'll...
Yeah.
You want to talk about that some more? Stick around, because we've probably got about 10 minutes to talk about that later.
We've got some really good stuff on that later, but I would just say for now, to paraphrase a line from the same Rush song that gave us the title to our last episode, he's noble enough to know what's right and strong enough to choose it.
There you go. So the threat of the sword, I love this because, of course, we know, those of us who've read it before, know full well that he can put his hand on the hilt of that thing, but he's not going to do much more.
Right, exactly.
But the hobbits don't know that.
Hobbits don't know that. First reading, we don't know that. Yeah.
Yeah. And then there's the line, the closing line here that in the movie comes at a powerful moment, but I love it right here because of what we just talked about earlier, that it shows Aragorn is expressing trust in the hobbits before he gets their trust. He's willing to reveal his identity, which is huge.
Yeah.
And that, he doesn't realize it, but that's going to absolutely seal the deal, as we're going to see here in the passage that you're going to read next.
Yep. There was a long silence. At last, Frodo spoke with hesitation. I believed that you were a friend before the letter came, he said. Or at least I wished you. You have frightened me several times tonight, but never in the way that servants of the enemy would, or so I imagine. I think one of his spies would, seem fairer and feel fouler, if you understand. I see, laughed Strider. I look foul and feel fair, is that it? All that is gold does not glitter. Not all those who wander are lost. Did the verses apply to you, then? Asked Frodo. I could not make out what they were about. But how did you know that they were in Gandalf's letter if you have never seen it? I did not know, he answered. But I am Aragorn, and those verses go with that name." He drew out his sword, and they saw that the blade was indeed broken a foot below the hilt. "Not much use, is it, Sam?" said Strider. "But the time is near when it shall be forged anew." Sam said nothing. "Well," said Strider, "with Sam's permission we will call that settled. Strider shall be your guide, and now I think it is time you went to bed and took what rest you can. We shall have a rough road tomorrow."
Indeed, we are going to have a rough road tomorrow, as we'll see.
Mm-hmm.
Probably good advice. Get some sleep, get some rest while you can.
Yeah.
I really love the way he treats Sam there, with Sam's permission. I mean, it's kind of an assumptive close. It's not like he said, "Sam, do we have your permission?" But you
don't think he's being a little sarcastic there?
I don't think so. I think he's saying now that Sam's okay with it.
Maybe.
I really do.
I don't know.
I don't know.
As I was just now reading it, I was thinking to myself, this is kind of a sarcastic comment. Well, with Sam's permission, we'll call that settled. I mean, it's not malicious or anything.
No,
but
maybe a little
but
bit tongue-in-cheek. But
it's a bit of snark, I think. But I don't know. It could go either way.
Yeah, I guess it could.
I'm not sure. I mean, I like the idea that he's being sincere and that he really wants to, he really wants Sam on his side.
Yeah, he knows that Frodo approves of him now, but he wants
Right.
Sam to approve of him too. I think he wants all four of them to trust him.
Yeah.
And he's going to need them to trust him because he's going to be leading them into some pretty difficult situations.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then, of course, we get that famous "look foul, feel fair" line.
One of Frodo's most famous lines. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's a cool line. It's a great little bit of that Shakespearean homage.
Yeah,
isn't
a little
it?
bit.
From Macbeth, fair is foul and foul is fair.
Yeah, I think so.
That's one I have not researched. It might even be older than that.
Oh, I'm sure it is.
I love the little bit of wordplay there in that inversion.
Yeah.
And the fact that Strider uses it as a chance to bring up this verse from the poem that, again, he does not know.
He didn't know it was there, right?
The hobbits know, yeah.
And then, of course, he reminds them that the verses go with the name and draws out the sword. And that's where I want to pick up something that Hammond and Scull mention. They remind us of the similarity of this broken sword motif with one of Tolkien's favorite childhood stories. And that would be Andrew Lang's retelling of the story of Sigurd in the Red Fairy book.
Oh, yeah, okay.
In that tale, Odin gives the sword Graham to Sigmund. It is shattered by Odin, ironically, and his son Sigurd gets the shards. Now, it's reforged for him later, and he eventually slays the dragon Fafnir with it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Aragorn may not kill any dragons, but the shards of a famous sword being reforged for its bearer's descendant, well, certainly has some origins here.
That's right. Yep.
Not that we're surprised. I mean, so many things. Again, we don't want to look too closely at the bones, right? But it's good to know. I think when we know the bones, it makes the soup a little bit richer.
That's very well said. I like that. Yeah. You don't want to look for meaning in the bones, but
No.
it's always fun to look at the bones and
Right.
just kind of understand some of those sources. Yeah, absolutely.
I agree. So Strider's advice, get the rest you can. So he mentions Weathertop, and he talks about how it's halfway between Bree and Rivendell, but it's actually more like halfway to the last bridge, isn't it?
Yeah.
They take 7 days to get from Bree to Weathertop, and 7 days from Weathertop to the bridge. Granted, at that point, Frodo's hurt, so it's a little slower pace. Then another 7 days from the bridge to Rivendell. Christopher Tolkien addressed this inconsistency, though. He said that it is now seen that Aragorn's words about halfway from here to Rivendell, they go back to Trotter's words here. And at this stage, the River Horwell and the last bridge on the East Road did not yet exist. I think that Trotter was merely giving Folko, and that would be Sam in the current version, a rough but sufficient idea of the distances before them. So, little hat tip to Hammond and Scull, as usual, for pointing out that clarification from Christopher.
Yeah, that's a really good one.
Yeah.
Thanks for that.
No problem. It's one of those things where, really? Halfway? I didn't think so. But,
Right.
I don't always look at the maps.
Roughly. Yeah,
I should look at the maps more often. I love maps, and I look at them, but I don't look at them when I'm reading the story. Does that make sense? I look at the maps themselves as a piece of art, or as...
It does make perfect sense, again, considering how many times you've read this story. And
Right.
You don't really need the map to get a sense of where they're going and how far they're traveling. You've got all that in your head.
Yeah,
And that's another thing that I think changes when you've read this story as much as we have.
that's true. But I think maybe it would be a good idea for me to maybe leave Karen Fonstad's Atlas open when I'm reading.
Yeah,
That would be helpful.
It's a good idea.
I haven't done that. I've read that book as a separate work, but not as a companion.
Well, and it's a fun book to just
Isn't
look
it?
through and
I love that
just
book.
look at the art and
We'll have to remember, I know we've included it in our library. We'll have to include a link to it in our show notes just because it is a fantastic resource.
Yeah, for sure.
I'm going to go ahead and pick up a little bit after that here where Frodo is expressing some concern about Gandalf. When did you last see Gandalf? Asked Frodo. Do you know where he is or what he is doing? Strider looked grave. I do not know, he said. I came west with him in the spring. I have often kept watch on the borders of the Shire in the last few years, when he was busy elsewhere. He seldom left it unguarded. We last met on the 1st of May at Sarn Ford down the Brandywine. He told me that his business with you had gone well and that you would be starting for Rivendell in the last week of September. As I knew he was at your side, I went away on a journey of my own, and that has proved ill, for plainly some news reached him, and I was not at hand to help. I am troubled, for the first time since I have known him. I should have had messages, even if he could not come himself. When I returned many days ago, I heard the ill news. The tidings had gone far and wide that Gandalf was missing, and the horseman had been seen. It was the elven folk of Gildor that told me this, and later they told me that you had left your home, but there was no news of your leaving Buckland. I've been watching the East Road anxiously. Do you think the Black Riders have anything to do with it? With Gandalf's absence, I mean, asked Frodo. I do not know of anything else that could have hindered him, except the enemy himself, said Strider. But do not give up hope. Gandalf is greater than you Shire folk know. As a rule, you can only see his jokes and toys. But this business of ours will be his greatest task. Yes, it will.
Yes,
by the way,
absolutely.
You need to know how much self-control it took me not to break Aragorn's character when I said it was the elven folk of Gildor that told me this, instead of saying the elven folk of Gilder. And drop into my...
as opposed to as into your Humperdinck voice.
Yes, exactly. I have a wife to murder.
I'm glad you didn't.
No, it just didn't fit. I couldn't do it at the time.
Yeah.
Yeah. This is really serious stuff. I mean, Aragorn he looked grave.
He looks grave, yeah, because
this is serious.
Gandalf is missing, and this is not good. This is bad news.
Yeah, nobody should be able to stop Gandalf. Nobody should be able to hinder him.
Right.
And to know that he is missing and there's not even a message from him.
Right.
That's a worrisome thing, especially knowing that the riders are out. Yeah.
That is very troubling. And I like Aragorn's little comment here that nothing else other than the Black Riders that he knows of could have hindered him, except for the enemy himself. Of course, we know there is somebody else out there that hindered Gandalf.
An enemy.
It's
not the
another
enemy.
Yes, an enemy. Yeah, I mean, that's big. And I love this last comment about, as a rule, you can only see his jokes and toys. You know, there's a lot more to Gandalf than the hobbits realize. He's not, if I can borrow a movie line, he's not just some conjurer of cheap tricks.
No, that's a good point. And in a way, it's the same thing as himself, Aragorn. You know, he's saying there's more to me than you know, but there's a lot more to Gandalf than you know.
That's true.
And then that very last line, that this business of ours will be his greatest task. He knows what's going on. He knows what has to happen and what's going to have to be done. And for him, he knows he's going to have to play a role in it somehow.
Right.
I'm certain of that.
Well, and we know because, we've read the Silmarillion, and folks who've listened to the podcast know, I mean, this is what Gandalf was sent for.
Yeah, absolutely.
This truly is his greatest task. This is his mission. This is why he's in Middle-earth.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Now, tell us a little bit, though, about the meeting. Strider says something about the last time I saw him was on the 1st of May at Sarn Ford down the Brandywine. You've got a bit on that, huh?
Yeah, Sarn Ford is a stone ford on the Brandywine. It's way down in the south. It's actually the southernmost border of the Shire. I'm going to refer folks to either the map in your book or the maps at loaderproject.com again, because you can
another good map.
Really see it nicely there. There's a road that begins in Mitchell Delving that crosses the ford in the south of the Shire and then eventually joins with the Greenway a bit further south. Now, in the nomenclature of The Lord of the Rings, Tolkien says that the name Sarn Ford is a half translation of Sarn Athrad, stony ford, a process frequent in place names. The Sindarid word Sarn meant stony, as a noun, a stony place, an outcrop of rock in softer ground or in a riverbed. Tolkien goes on to mention that it was named by the Númenóreans after a ford in the River Gellion, in the lost land of Beleriand, famous in legend.
Now that ford would be Sarn Athrad. Athrad meaning ford in Sindarin. That's the location where the dwarf road from Belagost, not Belagos, just to remind you from first season, from Belagost and I almost said Nogrod. Even after that. So from Belagost to Nogrod, crossed the River Gellion into East Beleriand. Now that also happens to be where Beren and his host attacked the dwarves who had taken the Nauglamir from Thingol. Now, Beren himself slew the Lord of Nogrod and took back the necklace right there at Sarnathrad.
At Sarnathrad.
Yeah.
The original
Yeah, the original Sarnathrad, not Sarn
not
Ford.
Sarn Ford.
Yeah.
Right.
This one's just a little further west. Under the waves over there.
It's under the waves now. Not much of a ford anymore.
No, not much of a ford at all. You're right. Oh, goodness. More of an under-ocean pathway, if you will.
Yeah. Right.
But a little pathway down the middle. Sorry.
So you get the bi-level effect.
That's right. Let's see. I think we've covered all of that stuff there. We don't read the next paragraph, but of course, Pippin wonders where Merry is, and that's when we get Merry's adventures, which is where you pick up.
Okay. At that moment, they heard a door slam. Then feet came running along the passage. Merry came in with a rush, followed by Nob. He shut the door hastily and leaned against it. He was out of breath. They stared at him in alarm for a moment before he gasped. "I have seen them, Frodo! I have seen them! Black Riders!" "Black Riders?" cried Frodo. "Where?" "Here, in the village. I stayed indoors for an hour. Then, as you did not come back, I went out for a stroll. I had come back again and was standing just outside the light of the lamp looking at the stars. Suddenly I shivered and felt that something horrible was creeping near. There was a sort of deeper shade among the shadows across the road, just beyond the edge of the lamplight. It slid away at once into the dark without a sound. There was no horse." "Which way did it go?" asked Strider, suddenly and sharply. Merry started, noticing the stranger for the first time. "Go on," said Frodo. "This is a friend of Gandalf's. I will explain later." "It seemed to make off up the road, eastward," continued Merry. "I tried to follow. Of course it vanished almost at once, but I went round the corner and on as far as the last house on the road." Strider looked at Merry with wonder. "You have a stout heart," he said, "but it was foolish."
Yeah, that was definitely not the wisest thing Merry's done. But I have to say, this is a kind of a hat tip to the movie, to what Peter Jackson and his team did. They took lines like this and they used them, even if they didn't use them in the exact moment. Yeah. But, that's what he says to Sam when Sam, holds up the chair like he's going to hit him.
Right. "I'll have you, Longshanks," right? That was the line from Sam. And,
in the film. And I do like that they use lines from the book, even if they're not using them in the exact same position or even the same character.
Right, yeah, they did as much of that as they could, which was cool.
Yeah. But let's talk about the content of what we just saw here.
Yeah.
I like that he's looking at the stars. I don't know, there's something we've talked always about stars being this sign of hope. And I know here it's just a subtle thing, but yeah, he's just looking at the stars, and then you get its total opposite.
We're contrasting this dark shadow that he sees with the stars. Yeah, absolutely. I think it's subtle, but I think you're right. I think there's a contrast there.
Yeah.
This is actually the first time that Merry has seen a Black Rider, isn't it? Because he wasn't with the three the three is company.
No, that's correct.
So yeah, this is his first time seeing the Black Riders, which is kind of funny to me because he's going to end up getting more up close and personal with a ring wraith than anybody.
Yes, he will. Yes, he will. I wonder if maybe that's why he wasn't quite afraid. I think if had it been Pippin and had he known what he knew from the road and through his company, maybe he wouldn't have followed him. But because there was no horse, as Merry says, there was no horse, maybe that's why he decided to follow. Well, I got to see if there's a horse to see if this is a Black Rider. Because right now it's just a black lump.
Right. Maybe he didn't recognize it the way the others would have because they've experienced it.
Right.
That could be.
That may be. I also like his reaction when he, wait a minute, who are you? What are you doing here? He just kind of merely started. Yeah. Frodo's quick reassurance. Don't worry about it. Friend of Gandalf's, let's go.
No time for that now.
Exactly. Just keep telling us. Keep telling the story. Keep moving, Merry. Move it along. Don't be like Barliman here. Interesting. He mentions, by the way, the last house on the road. Anybody know who lives there? Anybody? Sean?
Something Fernie.
Bill Fernie.
Something.
Yeah.
Ill Fernie. Bill Fernie.
Marchese. All right. So.
Followed him that far.
Exactly. Now Strider says that
was a smart thing.
No, not a smart thing. Yeah. Strider says it's brave, but foolish.
But Merry didn't really have much of a choice, honestly.
No, I know we're not going to read that, but he says, I could hardly help myself. I was drawn. So then he hears voices by the hedge, and then he falls over, and he has no idea what happened. So that's when Nob fills in, tells the story about two men stooping over Merry who looked to be asleep. But Strider knows what it was that knocked him out.
The Black Breath.
Yeah.
And this, I've got a brief sidebar on the Black Breath here. This isn't the last time that Merry is going to be stricken with the Black Breath,
No, it is not.
He and many others in Minas Tirith are going to be sick from this, actually a much more severe form of it, later on after the Battle of the Pelennor Fields. In the chapter, The Houses of Healing, it's called either the Black Breath or the Black Shadow.
And again, it is Aragorn who correctly diagnoses the Black Shadow as Black Breath before treating it with Athelas.
That's right. Before Aragorn came along and said what this was, that chapter actually says of the healers of Minas Tirith, "But now their art and knowledge were baffled, for there were many sick of a malady that would not be healed, and they called it the Black Shadow, for it came from the Nazgul. And those who were stricken with it fell slowly into an ever deeper dream, and then passed to silence and a deadly cold, and so died. And it seemed to the tenders of the sick that on the halfling and on the Lady of Rohan this malady lay heavily."
Yeah.
So there you have it. I mean, many were sick from the Black Breath after the battle, including Faramir, for one. But Merry and Éowyn had the worst case of it, not surprisingly, because of their direct contact with the Witch King.
Yeah, well, killing him will do that to you. We see the effects of it after that battle in Merry's own point of view, as he's following the men carrying Theoden's body and the injured Éowyn back into Minas Tirith. And here's a quote from that. "To Merry, the ascent seemed age-long, a meaningless journey in a hateful dream, going on and on to some dim ending that memory cannot seize. Slowly the lights of the torches in front of him flickered and went out, and he was walking in a darkness, and he thought, 'This is a tunnel leading to a tomb. There we shall stay forever.' But suddenly into his dream there fell a living voice. And that voice was Pippin's, and his presence, really his friendship, is what helps lift the spell for Merry's eyes a little bit. It's a very dangerous effect of contact with the Ringwraiths, and what we see here in this chapter is just the tiniest taste of it.
Yeah, just the tiniest taste of it.
Just a prelude.
Merry just sort of brushes over it, with an ugly dream, which I can't remember.
Yeah.
Good for him that he can't, because when we see it later on, it's a very dark and bleak, sad, sad dream, sad way of seeing the world.
I can't even begin to imagine how disconcerting that would be, how disheartening.
Yeah, it's just full of despair. It's just
that's a
so
great
much despair,
word. That's a great word because of the contrast we've long set up between hope and despair, and how it is indeed hope that is really the only way to defeat it, isn't it? I mean, Athelas, hope and Athelas, but great stuff.
Right, true.
So I'm going to go ahead and pick up here right after the Black Breath, and we're going to talk a little bit about how what the plans are now. The riders know everything. The riders must have left their horses outside and passed back through the south gate in secret. They will know all the news now, for they have visited Bill Ferny, and probably that southerner was a spy as well. Something may happen in the night before we leave Bree." "What will happen?" said Merry. "Will they attack the inn?" "No, I think not," said Strider. "They are not all here yet, and in any case that is not their way. In dark and loneliness they are strongest. They will not openly attack a house where there are lights and many people. Not until they are desperate. Not while all the long leagues of Eriador still lie before us. But their power is in terror, and already some in Bree are in their clutch. They will drive these wretches to some evil work. Ferny and some of the strangers, and maybe the gatekeeper too. They had words with Harry at Westgate on Monday. I was watching them. He was white and shaking when they left him." "We seem to have enemies all around," said Frodo. "What are we to do?" "Stay here and do not go to your rooms. They are sure to have found out which those are. The Hobbit rooms have windows looking north and close to the ground. We will all remain together and bar this window and the door." I mean, this changes their plans. This radically changes their plans, knowing that the riders are aware. So thank goodness Merry got back in time, and thank goodness, believe it or not, that Merry had this experience, as terrifying as it might have been.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It wasn't a very wise thing to do. He may not have had control over himself, but man, it's a good thing that he did it.
It sure is. Yeah. But we get another explanation of just what the power of the Ringwraiths is. It's not just brute physical force and strength. It is fear. It is terror.
In dark and loneliness, they are strongest. Yep.
Oh. And that makes sense. Their life, if you want to even call it that, their air quote life is nothing but dark and loneliness.
Right.
And terror. Yeah. I mean, that is all they are.
They embody
all they
dark
know.
And loneliness. Yeah.
Absolutely. And poor Harry. Yeah. Poor Harry. I feel bad.
We've talked a few times now about how in early drafts he was much more clearly a conspirator.
Yeah.
Here, probably not, but Aragorn kind of still leaves it open, doesn't he? Maybe the gatekeeper too, and they did have words.
Maybe
with
not
him.
a conspirator in the same way as Fernie is, but like
True.
he's been
he's been approached.
He's been scared into giving some information, whereas Fernie is happy to do it.
True. Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah. So the plan, of course, don't go to the Hobbit rooms. There are only a handful of those. They know where they are. You don't want to be there.
Mm-hmm.
And we're not going to read this part, but Strider and Nob, I love this. Strider, such a humble guy. What are you going to do? I'm going to go get your luggage. Nob and I are going to go take care of your bags.
Yeah.
Are you going to want a tip? I mean,
probably partly a practical
thing. It really
thing.
is. You don't want the hobbits.
If the ring rates are waiting for them in the room, then yeah.
Strider, you don't want to send Nob by himself.
You don't want Nob out there alone.
No.
Yeah.
No.
He's already been terrified out of his wits by
seeing the Black Riders hunched over the form of Sleeping Mary there.
Right.
But Nob's such a smart guy. He ruffles up the clothes, puts the bolster in the bed. I love that he even does an imitation of your head with a brown woolen mat, Mr. Underhill, sir. It's great. That's great stuff.
I like that.
Absolutely.
Pippin, of course, notices the joke there.
Yeah.
Oh, very lifelike. Yeah. Oh, yeah, it would look just like you, Frodo.
That's right. Goodness. But then I have you closing out the chapter, and we'll discuss that before moving on to the wonderful bag segment we got tonight.
All right. Their bags and gear they piled on the parlor floor. They pushed a low chair against the door and shut the window. Peering out, Frodo saw that the night was still clear. The sickle was swinging bright above the shoulders of Bree Hill. He then closed and barred the heavy inside shutters and drew the curtains together. Strider built up the fire and blew out all the candles. The hobbits lay down on their blankets with their feet towards the hearth, but Strider settled himself in the chair against the door. They talked for a little, for Merry still had several questions to ask. "Jumps over the moon," chuckled Merry as he rolled himself in his blanket. "Very ridiculous of you, Frodo, but I wish I had been there to see. The worthies of Bree will be discussing it 100 years hence." "I hope so," said Strider. Then they all fell silent, and one by one the hobbits dropped off to sleep.
There you go. Nighty-night, dear hobbits. Good night, Moon.
Good night, Frodo. Good night, Samwise. Good night, Meriadoc.
Oh, goodness. So just a touch on the sickle, right? We've talked about this before. We know from the Silmarillion that the sickle, also known as the plow or the Big Dipper, that's actually called the Valakirka, the sickle of the Valar and sign of doom.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and that's why I think it's actually a really good thing that you brought up the hope in Merry looking at the stars earlier, because the sickle itself, back in that chapter in the Silmarillion, it says that the sickle was set by Varda high in the north as a challenge to Melkor.
That's right.
So, some of these stars are really, and specifically the sickle, are reminders that the Valar are there.
Yes.
And that they're challenging evil. I think that's pretty cool that it's there.
I agree. So then we get the closing of the closing and barring of the shutters. I love Merry's little comment there.
Yeah.
Very ridiculous, Frodo.
But I wish I had seen it.
Yeah. That's great stuff.
And Strider's response, man.
Oh, I know.
It's one of those gut punch moments. Like
it is. It's a reminder that if we're not successful in this mission, there won't be any worthies of Bree.
There won't be a Bree.
Yeah. And they sure as heck won't be discussing the night that the one guy who had the chance to destroy the ring screwed the whole thing up.
Yeah, when he got up
getting
on a table
drunk and
sang
standing
a
on a table to sing.
Yeah.
I know. Oh, goodness.
Yeah. Great.
Hopefully the worthies of Bree will be discussing this episode 100 years hence. For now, though, be sure to come back next week when Fatty Bolger makes another appearance as we begin Chapter 11, A Knife in the Dark.
Now, before we reach into Barliman's bag, and clearly we can't trust that he's getting things to us in a timely fashion anymore, we want to remind, actually, he's done a little better than 3 months for us, I have to say.
That's true. We do get things a little quicker than 3 months, but,
A little quicker.
Yeah.
Yeah. But before that, we want to remind you about the Fellowship of the Podcast. As you know by now, our Discord server is up and running. Each month, our patrons get to listen to our goofs and our gaffes, our edits and our outtakes.
Our mini edits and outtakes.
And there have been a few of those.
Yes, there have.
Not to mention getting a sneak peek at an episode weeks before everyone else.
In fact, several of our supporters are listening to us right this moment, as today is this month's Discord episode. But in order to keep that deep embarrassment amongst friends, the server is limited to patrons at the Gift of Gondor level or higher. So if you want to listen in live during an episode recording, be sure to check out patreon.com/prancingponypod, where you can also get access to other exclusive content and PPP swag. Check out our next goal, too. We're almost certain to have reached it by the time this airs, of setting up a monthly live hangout session with us on Discord.
And if you're looking for a new Tolkien book, check out the official library pages at our website, theprancingponypodcast.com, where we've put together a set of links for our listeners to all the books we've ever mentioned on the show, Tolkien or otherwise. And if you wouldn't mind posting a review for us on iTunes, we'd be grateful. That increases our visibility, which means more new listeners, more great questions for Barliman, more discussion on social media, and a livelier Tolkien community.
Absolutely. Now, speaking of social media, it is also helpful if you share us. Facebook, Twitter, Reddit, wherever there happen to be Tolkien fans. Please let them know about us. Now, with that, it is time to see what old Barliman has in the mailbag for us.
Okay, well, I want to start with a comment from our old friend Stefan J. in the Netherlands. He's enlightened us to a lot of really cool Dutch word nerdery in the past, and today is no exception.
Yes, he has. Yeah.
Back in episode 120, we talked about some of Tom Bombadil's, well, let's call them not so flattering names for Mary's ponies.
Yeah.
And one of the better ones actually was Wise Nose. Well, Stefan wrote to us on Facebook to let us know that the Dutch cognate of that word, which is, I think, pronounced wijsneus, means a know-it-all in Dutch.
I love that.
Isn't that cool?
That is awesome. Well, thanks for that, Stefan. Appreciate that because, of course, our Dutch is rusty.
Yeah, quite a bit. Yeah.
And by rusty, I mean, like, there is
non-existent.
none of it. Just so you know.
Yeah.
And now we've got a question from one of our patrons, Maya in Michigan. Maya asked, at the Prancing Pony, when Aragorn draws his sword and tells Frodo that if I wanted the ring, I could have it now, do you think for a brief moment Aragorn was actually tempted to claim it for himself, for greed, or for desire to use it for good?
Well,
that's a good question.
We've talked about this a little bit already, and it certainly is a powerful moment, and we talked about Coker's comments on it. To go a little deeper into the language he uses, I don't think Aragorn saying, I could have it now, is necessarily a sign that he's being tempted at that moment. I kind of think that by the time he speaks, he's already thought about it, and he's already moved past the temptation. When he says, if I was after the ring, I could have it now, he's speaking firmly in the conditional mood. Now, sorry for going grammar nerd.
What sort of mood are you in? I'm in a conditional mood.
I'm in a conditional mood today.
What in the world? Just no.
Forgive me forgive the total grammar nerdery here, but your high school English teacher would have called this the counterfactual conditional. It's basically saying what would happen if some condition were true, but that condition isn't true. It's counterfactual, contrary to fact.
Yeah.
Now, if Strider was after the ring, he could have it now, but he's not after it, which is demonstrated by the fact that he hasn't taken it already.
Aha.
And I noticed that this comment of his is parallel to another statement that's in the conditional mood, responding to Sam's accusation that he might be an imposter who had killed the real Strider. He says, if I had killed the real Strider, I could kill you. Now, both of those conditions, A, that he killed the real Strider, and B, that he wants the ring, are not true. And I think Aragorn is just using them to sort of support each other in making his case for the hobbits to trust him.
Okay.
But I'll admit he does say it in a very menacing way, but I think that our discussion last time helps us understand a little bit of why.
Sure.
What do you think?
Some might say this is more of a shock tactic. Now, that's a phrase we're borrowing from Paul Coker. He used that in the chapter on Aragorn that we discussed last week and mentioned again earlier tonight. So there's more of that shock tactic to teach the hobbits a lesson in being more careful, if that's the way you go on this. He's trying to show them that anyone, even a friend of Gandalf who's been sent to protect them, anyone could be tempted by the ring and might try to take it from them and turn on them quickly, so they need to be more careful.
Yeah, I agree with all that, but I mean, I think when he says, I could have it now, I think he's really just going for shock tactics there.
Yeah. Okay.
But yeah, I think it's really all about the shock tactics at this point. I don't think he's actually having that moment of temptation right then and there. I think he's had it, but I don't think he's having it then.
Interesting. Well, you know, I might actually for once disagree with you a little bit, but let me explain.
How dare you?
I know.
How dare you, sir?
Oh, it's fun. No, I like it. This feels good. I'm just wait now. No. First, as Coker says, and this is a quote from Master of Middle-earth, like every other leader of the West, he is given one fateful chance to yield to its temptation, but he conquers it and is never bothered by it again. Well, when is that one fateful chance? I think it is now, but here's the twist. I think he goes into this moment fully knowing that he's facing temptation and fully knowing that he is also prepared to overcome that temptation. So yeah, he makes that counterfactual conditional statement that you talked about. But then we see him seem to grow taller. In his eyes gleamed a light, keen and commanding. Throwing back his cloak, he laid his hand on the hilt of a sword that had hung concealed by his side. They did not dare to move. I think in that very moment, he is being tempted. But I think a few other things are true, and these are important. One, he knew that he would face this temptation at some point. Sometime during his involvement with Frodo, he's going to face this temptation. He knew that even before any of this started. So number two, he's prepared to face and defeat that temptation. And that's why number three, I think, he chose this moment, a moment under his control, to face and defeat the temptation. With number four, the purpose of demonstrating his trustworthiness to the hobbits. That's what I think is going on there. Did he know he'd never be tempted again if he beat it once? I don't know. I mean, Coker says he defeated it and it never bothered him again. I don't think Aragorn knew that.
He couldn't have known that at the time, right?
No, but certainly we see it later on. In the Council of Elrond, Frodo says, when he finds out the lineage of Aragorn, well, it belongs to you and not to me at all. Aragorn immediately responds by saying, he doesn't say, yeah, but you hold on to it. He says, it does not belong to either of us, but it has been ordained that you should hold it for a while. He's totally unfazed by Frodo's offer or attempt to unload the ring, I guess. He's like, I don't want this thing. But yeah.
Pass that hot potato.
Yeah, exactly. Hot potato. But yeah, that's where I'm landing.
That's interesting. I mean, you do make a good case there. So you're saying that he makes that statement, but he's still tempted in that next moment, but it's sort of a controlled situation.
He's willingly walking into the temptation because he's more prepared for it.
And that all that stuff that happens in that intervening paragraph where he grows taller and his eyes gleam and everything, that is actually
that's
the temptation
him fighting
happening.
it. Yeah, that's him fighting the temptation.
Whereas I said that he had already thought about it, he'd already been tempted, and he'd already been moved past it. That's
which may also be true. That may also be true in the sense that he may have considered it, but there's no temptation without the actual ability. I mean, if I'm tempted, let's think of a terrible thing. If I'm tempted to lie on my taxes, but it's September, then I have I'm not really facing a very real temptation.
You've got plenty of time to get past
what I mean?
Before it actually. I do see what you're saying, and I think for that reason, I think yours is a bit more exciting, isn't it? Because the temptation is happening right here at this moment, and
right at the moment,
immediate peril. And I guess maybe that's why I thought, still kind of think, I don't know, kind of on the fence now, why I think differently, because again, I don't really see any immediate peril here, but that could just be because again, I've read this so many times, I know what happens.
And I think the peril is minimized because he's aware of it. This is not like, and I think we want to maybe riff on this a little bit, talk about how this interacts with a couple of other characters. He knows that he's going to face this moment, and so he is prepared, and he walks in and actually triggers this moment, so to speak. He walks directly into the face of temptation and basically says, I'm here. Go ahead and tempt me.
I'm going to trigger it now because I feel like I'm in control of myself right now.
I'm in control.
That's really knows. Cool, and I like that. Yeah.
Yeah, he's ready for it. He's ready to face it and figures, I'm going to face this now, and that's going to strengthen my position and help me to not be tempted again, even if he doesn't know that he'll never be tempted again.
So one more thing about
that to a couple others.
Well, one more thing on that, and then I definitely want to take a look at a couple of other passages. But I think one thing that we're both saying is that he has thought about this moment. He has prepared for this moment. And that forethought and that preparation and that self-control helps him get past the temptation very quickly whenever it comes, whether it came now or whether it came, a couple of hours ago or a couple of days ago. Yeah. But I do really want to compare this to a couple of those other moments of temptation. And I think you've got the Galadriel one, right?
I pulled Galadriel, and I'm going to let you take Gandalf. So I'm going to go. This is later on in the chapter, "The Mirror of Galadriel," which is chapter 7 of book 2. So we'll get there a very long time from now.
Maybe about a year.
Sometime in maybe February or March of next year. I'm thinking. I don't know. Maybe April. So Frodo and Sam and Galadriel are at the mirror, and Galadriel has just said that she wished the One Ring had never been made. So Frodo's response. You are wise and fearless and fair, Lady Galadriel, said Frodo. I will give you the One Ring if you ask for it. It is too great a matter for me. Galadriel laughed with a sudden clear laugh. Wise the Lady Galadriel may be, she said, yet here she has met her match in courtesy. Gently are you revenged for my testing of your heart at our first meeting. You begin to see with a keen eye. I do not deny that my heart has greatly desired to ask what you offer. For many long years I had pondered what I might do, should the great ring come into my hands, and behold, it was brought within my grasp. The evil that was devised long ago works on in many ways, whether Sauron himself stands or falls. Would not that have been a noble deed to set to the credit of his ring, if I had taken it by force or fear from my guest? And now at last it comes. You will give me the ring freely. In place of the Dark Lord you will set up a queen, and I shall not be dark, but beautiful, and terrible as the morning and the night, fair as the sea and the sun and the snow upon the mountain, dreadful as the storm and the lightning, stronger than the foundations of the earth. All shall love me and despair. She lifted up her hand, and from the ring that she wore there issued a great light that illumined her alone and left all else dark. She stood before Frodo, seeming now tall beyond measurement, and beautiful beyond enduring, terrible and worshipful. Then she let her hand fall, and the light faded, and suddenly she laughed again. And lo, she was shrunken, a slender elf woman, clad in simple white, whose gentle voice was soft and sad. I pass the test, she said. I will diminish, and go into the west, and remain Galadriel. So I think there we see this being much more tempting for her.
That is a moment of temptation. And I think that's
real temptation. She comes awfully close, I think.
Yeah, she really does. And I think that's what kind of led me down the path of thinking, Aragorn's really not tempted because this is not a moment like that. But it could just be that he's better prepared for it.
Yeah.
Maybe he knows his own weakness a bit better, obviously, being Isildur's heir.
Being a man and Isildur's heir, right?
Yeah. So that's
and
really
I think he knew the minute that he talked with Gandalf that the ring was going to be in his immediate vicinity.
Yeah, yeah. So he's
I don't think Galadriel knew until they were there, right? Until they arrived and she knew immediately this was the ring bearer. I don't think she knew that it was going to necessarily come to her.
And look, let's face it, we know that Galadriel's one of the Noldor, one of the original Noldor who were exiled. We know that she was one of the more ambitious ones.
OG Noldor.
Exactly. OG, original Galadriel. She was one of the more one of the more ambitious ones, right? She was one of the ones who she wanted lands and realms of her own.
She was going to leave even if Fëanor hadn't put them all into exile. Right?
Yeah, she was ready to go. She was definitely thinking about going. And so I think that's really very interesting.
I think it's a much stronger temptation because she's less prepared for it.
Yeah.
And she didn't choose this moment.
And that's fascinating to think that Aragorn could be better prepared for anything than Galadriel could. But
that is a little odd. Right. Yeah. But you've got a Gandalf moment, right?
I've got a Gandalf moment, and this is going all the way back to The Shadow of the Past, which we have already been through on the podcast. But this is the moment where, they're talking about it, and Gandalf is just, Frodo is a little nervous about the quest, and Gandalf has just told him that
just a little,
you have to use the strength and heart and wits that you have. And I'll pick up there with Frodo saying, "But I have so little of any of these things. You are wise and powerful. Will you not take the ring?" "No," cried Gandalf, springing to his feet. "With that power I should have power too great and terrible, and over me the ring would gain a power still greater and more deadly." His eyes flashed, and his face was lit as by a fire within. "Do not tempt me, for I do not wish to become like the Dark Lord himself. Yet the way of the ring to my heart is by pity for weakness and the desire of strength to do good. Do not tempt me. I dare not take it, not even to keep it safe, unused. The wish to wield it would be too great for my strength. I shall have such need of it. Great perils lie before me." He went to the window and drew aside the curtains and the shutters. Sunlight streamed back again into the room. Sam passed along the path outside whistling. "And now," said the wizard, turning back to Frodo, "the decision lies with you, but I will always help you." He laid his hand on Frodo's shoulder. "I will help you bear this burden as long as it is yours to bear. But we must do something soon. The enemy is moving."
Very good.
And I just wanted to read that second paragraph because it really shows the change from the temptation
doesn't it?
to...
It's the successful defeat of the temptation.
Yeah.
The sunlight streaming and one thing I noticed in both of these, even though they're both taken a little bit by surprise, that is, they're not walking voluntarily into the temptation the way I think Aragorn is. both of them have clearly thought about the possibility of this happening.
Mm-hmm.
Galadriel talks about how she has literally thought about it. I have considered this. What would happen if the One Ring were to come into my possession?
Yeah.
And Gandalf doesn't say that, but he says specifically what would happen. He knows, and he knows because he's thought about this.
Absolutely.
I can't take this ring because I would have power too great and terrible. It would gain a power still greater and deadly.
Mm-hmm.
I'd become like the Dark Lord himself. So he knows. So he's prepared, but he wasn't ready to face that temptation this particular moment. He still defeated it. He still overcame it. And like Coker says, all these people in the West are given a moment of temptation.
Yeah.
And how they handle it is what tells the difference.
It says a lot about their character, the way they each handle it.
Mm-hmm.
And Gandalf does have a moment of temptation, not as severe as Galadriel's, it seems.
No, not quite as severe.
But definitely.
That may be because he's not a Noldo.
Could be, yeah.
I think there's a lot to be said about that. You're right.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he is, as an Ainu, his will should be stronger to begin with, even though he's incarnate.
Yeah.
But that's really cool. And I think, I don't know, you've made a good case there. There definitely is a temptation going on in Aragorn somewhere, whether it's now or whether it was a little while ago. Maybe it doesn't even really matter that much. The fact is that Aragorn is finally face to face with the ring, and he makes the right choice.
Yeah, he does. Absolutely. And we'll get to see some more people tempted by it later, too.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I can't help but think of Boromir and Faramir.
Of course, yeah.
And their different responses. But that's like a whole episode. So we'll get to that later.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'll move on to the next question. I think we've got just enough time for one more fairly short one.
Yeah.
Tom G. asked us, I was interested in your take on Aragorn carrying around a broken Narsil. Basically, Tom is asking, did he carry it around with him all the time? Tom says, I believe that it was more likely stashed away in a safe location, and that at the time Aragorn met the hobbits in Bree, it was only recently unearthed. In his youth, Aragorn ranged all about Middle-earth, even fighting under the name of Thorongil in the armies of Gondor and Rohan. If he was carrying Narsil around all that time, I'm sure there would have been talk. So, well said. Another little speculation question. What do you think, Alan? Why don't you start?
Well, when I carry a bottle of Narsil around, there's always talk. People wonder why I use Narsil. Talk to your doctor about Narsil. No, sorry. Had to go there. We've joked about that a few other things, right? It was Narmakil.
It was Narmakil, and there was another. There was at least one other one, I think.
There was one other one because that's what started the whole thing. But
ask your doctor if Narsil is right for you. Oh, it was Narathal.
Well, Narathal, that's right. Firefoot. Yeah. That's right.
Ask your doctor if Narsil is right for you. Side effects may include broken sword, shards in the fingers. All right, sorry.
There you go. So what do I think about this? I think Aragorn certainly must have had another sword that he used while he was off ranging. Yeah. How effective is a sword that's broken at 12 inches off the hilt? He did a lot of fighting for all those years, and clearly he's not fighting with a broken sword. We saw in this chapter, his broken sword is not much use, the text says. Well, 12 inches long, broken blade, no help.
Not going to be very useful,
No. One of Tolkien's many negative comments on the infamous Zimmerman script was that at Weathertop, Zimmerman had Strider whip out a sword, to which Tolkien responded, Strider does not whip out a sword in the book. Naturally not. His sword was broken.
Right.
Now, clearly, Tolkien didn't want us to get the impression that Strider fights with a broken Narsil. So he must have used a more functional sword when fighting. Probably nothing special, but just whatever was handy. As Thorongil, he probably would have used ordinary weapons from the armories of Rohan or Gondor.
Yeah.
Maybe for his ranging in Eriador, he uses a weapon from the Rivendell armory, or maybe the Dunedain have their own armory somewhere. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think that is reasonable. I think we should point out that, contrary to what we see from in the Peter Jackson movies, there's that gorgeous scene with the shards of Narsil on the pedestal at Rivendell. In the book, Elrond did actually give the shards to Aragorn a long time ago when he came of age. Oh, yeah. So he has had him
62 years ago.
He has had them in his possession for most of his life. Yeah.
Yeah. It's in Appendix A5 when Estel, Hope, Aragorn, was 20 years old. Elrond told him his true name and delivered to him the heirlooms of his house, saying, Here is the ring of Barahir, he said, the token of our kinship from afar. And here also are the shards of Narsil. With these you may yet do great deeds, for I foretell that the span of your life shall be greater than the measure of men, unless evil befalls you, or you fail at the test. But the test will be hard and long. The scepter of Anuminus I withhold, for you have yet to earn it. I love that's. Here you go. You can
have this ring. You can have this broken sword, but you can't have the scepter.
I was trying to think of like your kids going off to college and you're giving them, here's your computer, here's your backpack. You can't have the car though.
You can't have the car. For you have yet
you haven't
to
earned it yet.
Yeah.
Yes. Anyway, now, admittedly, we don't know whether he kept the shards on his person at all times. That seems a little impractical, or whether he just kept them somewhere safe. But they were at least in his possession from that day on.
Yeah, and I agree. I think it would be pretty impractical to carry the shards with him all the time. I tend to think that when he's traveling, he's not going to carry this family heirloom with him. I mean, if I'm going off to war and I may not come back, I'm probably not going to bring a priceless and irreplaceable family heirloom with me.
And useless, I would add.
And useless, right. I mean,
right.
Yeah, I mean, as a ranger, stealth and speed are important to him, and he's not going to weigh himself down with an extra sword
and a bag of metal bits
use.
making a bag of metal bits making all that sound.
Yeah, that's true too.
What's that rattling racket?
Right.
It's just the shards of a broken sword.
It's extra weight that he can't use. It's something that he really would not want to lose. And as Tom suggests, the appearance of a mysterious guy with a northern accent and a broken blade, yeah, that'd probably get people talking.
Yeah, that would.
So,
that would.
So I think he did keep it somewhere safe. I don't know where, maybe somewhere in the angle where we know the Dunedain had, well, as close to a permanent settlement as they had by this time. I mean, I guess that does beg the question of why he's carrying Narsil with him now. But, for one thing, certainly he has come to Bree to meet Frodo. He might want to have the shards of Narsil as proof of his identity. I know he didn't know anything about what was in Gandalf's letter, but maybe he has some idea that his identity might come into question. The hobbits might be told something about the poem, especially since, remember, the poem was written by Bilbo. And so it's proof of the fact that he knows Bilbo as well, which would be another point in his favor as somebody they can trust.
I hadn't thought about that, but I was thinking more, he knows that Frodo's begun the quest, so he knows that the time is coming for Narsil to be reforged.
Yeah,
we just heard him say the time is near when it should be forged anew. Well, if he had it stashed away somewhere, he probably had to go retrieve it before meeting Frodo, so that he'll have it with him when they get to Rivendell, where it can be reforged.
Right,
This kind of helps explain why he isn't carrying any other sword in addition to Narsil right now. He's not expecting to encounter any enemies until he gets to Rivendell, except for Black Riders, and he knows he can't fight them with a sword anyway.
Right, yeah.
And then once he gets the sword reforged, he's not going to need another sword, so why have another one with him now?
Yeah, and I think that probably really is the most likely reason. I think that he has Narsil on him now and no other weapon, so yeah.
Yeah. I agree. Well, folks, that wraps it up for another episode of the Prancing Pony Podcast. Please be sure to join us again next week when guests are unable to sleep in their beds and good bolsters ruined and all.
What are we coming to? Folks, thanks again for listening, and thank you for making our common room on Facebook such a fun place to spend time. We want all of you to be a part of this conversation, and it doesn't stop when the episode ends. See the comments, questions, corrections, and more on Facebook at The Prancing Pony Podcast, on Twitter at Prancing Pony Pod, and on Instagram at Prancing Pony Pod.
And a very special thank you to our patrons at the Kierdance contribution tier: DeMay in Alaska, James in Virginia, Tamsin in Minnesota, Emily in Texas, and Chad in Texas. Thank you all very much.
Make sure you don't miss any episodes of the Prancing Pony Podcast. Subscribe to the show through iTunes, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app.
And one last thing as always, don't forget to send your thoughts, comments, and most of all, your wilderness camping advice for Weathertop to Barliman at theprancingponypodcast.com, and, well, we'll try to get him into our next show. Well, however long we've had, it is still far too short a time to spend among such excellent and admirable listeners. But until next time,
farewell, friends.